The restaurant buzzed with soft music and polite laughter, the kind that made everything feel safe on the surface. Elias Warren arrived early, as he always did. He checked the reservation, greeted the staff by name, and chose the table near the window. He liked order. It gave him control. Tonight was supposed to be easy. A family dinner. A celebration for his niece, Mara's graduation. He had paid for it without telling anyone, just like he paid for many things no one talked about. When the family arrived, the noise followed them. Chairs scraped. Coats fell over the backs of seats. Phones came out. Kelia smiled, nodded, listened. He asked about classes, future plans, small dreams that sounded big when spoken aloud. He noticed how relaxed everyone was, how comfortable. That comfort had been built quietly over years, with checks sent on time and problems handled without. Complaint. Mara arrived last. She carried herself with confidence that came from never having to worry about falling. She hugged Elias quickly, already distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone. "Thanks for dinner, Uncle," she said, casual, like it was expected. Elias returned the smile, told himself not to read into it. The food came fast, plates filled. The table, glasses clinked, stories overlapped. Elias listened more than he spoke. He always did. He had learned that people revealed themselves when they felt safe enough to talk without being watched. Mara leaned back in her chair halfway through the meal. She had been quiet, smiling at messages, half present. Then she looked up, eyes sharp, with playful energy. "So," she said, her voice light but loud, "can I ask something without everyone getting weird?" A few people laughed. Someone said, "Uh-oh." Elias felt a small shift in the air. He looked at Mara, waiting. She tilted her head toward him. "Call Elias," she said, smiling. "Are we still pretending you're single by choice? Or yes? That's just something we don't talk about anymore." The table went still. Not silent, but close. Elias felt the words hit him like cold water. He didn't react. He didn't move. He waited for anyone to stop it. No one did. Mara shrugged, encouraged by the pause. "I mean, you're 42, no wife, no kids, all that success, and nothing personal to show for it. It's kind of sad, right?" A laugh broke out, thin and unsure. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. Elias saw his sister Linda smile in that careful way people did when they hoped something would pass on its own. She didn't correct her daughter. She didn't defend her brother. Elias nodded slowly. He kept his face calm. Inside, something folded in on itself. He thought of nights spent working late to keep his business alive. 5 missed chances, yes, but also choices made with purpose. He thought of hospital bills he paid without being asked, of tuition deposits made quietly, of rent covered during temporary hard times that somehow never ended. Mara wasn't finished. "Just saying," she added, waving her hand. "Money's great, but what's the point if you go home alone every night?" That did it. Not the words, but the comfort with which she said them. The ease. The belief that his life was open for judgment because he never pushed back. Elias took a sip of water. He felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept it contained. He met Mara's eyes and offered a small smile. "Everyone chooses their own path," he said evenly. Mara rolled her eyes, laughing. "Sure, whatever helps." The conversation shifted. After that, forced and awkward. Someone changed the subject. Plates were cleared. Dessert arrived untouched by joy. Elias paid the bill when it came, like always. He did it quickly, without comment. Outside, the night air felt sharp. People said their goodbyes. Hugs were exchanged. Mara hugged him again, quick and careless. "Don't be mad," she said softly. "It was just a joke." Elias nodded. He watched them leave. Linda didn't look back. He drove home in silence. Street lights passed in steady rhythm. His phone buzzed once at a red light. A message from Mara. "Relax, Uncle. You're too sensitive." He didn't answer. At home, Elias stood in his dark living room, jacket still on, The quiet pressed in. He replayed the moment again and again, not just Mara's words, but the laughter, the silence, the way everyone had let it happen. He realized something then. This wasn't a single moment, was a pattern he had allowed. His generosity had blurred into expectation. His silence had been mistaken for weakness. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, not to work, but to look. To see clearly. Numbers lined up on the screen, clean and honest. They told a story different from the one told at dinner. A story of support given freely and respect never returned. His phone buzzed again. Linda, this time, he watched it ring. He didn't pick up. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel proud of holding everything together. He felt tired of being useful but unseen, tired of paying for comfort that came with quiet disrespect. As the night deepened, his hurt sharpened into something more focused. Not rage, not yet, but resolve. The kind that comes when a person finally understands where the line should have been drawn all along. He closed the laptop. Tomorrow, he would decide what to do with the truth he could no longer ignore. Elias woke the next morning with the weight of last night pressing on him. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. Outside, the city moved as usual, cars' footsteps, distant sirens, but inside, he felt a stillness that allowed him to think, really think, for the first time in years. He made coffee, black, strong, and sipped it slowly, letting the warmth ground him while his mind raced. The dinner replayed in his head, each laugh, each glance, each pause magnified. Mara's words weren't just a joke. They were a symbol of everything he had endured in silence, everything he had overlooked for the sake of being the family's backbone. He moved to his desk and opened his laptop. Bank statements, accounts, payments he had quietly managed for years, tuition, rent, medical bills. Everything flowed outward without question, without recognition. He saw it clearly now. His generosity had been taken for granted. It had allowed Mara to mock him, his sister to stay silent, everyone to assume that what he did for them was normal, even owed. It was not owed. It had never been owed. A tightness settled in his chest as he realized the depth of his frustration. This wasn't about money. It was about respect, about being seen as a person, not just a provider. His phone buzzed. Linda, he ignored it. Then again and again. Each call was like a small alarm, a reminder that the people who depended on him were not aware of the weight of their privilege. He let them ring. 31 times in total, he would later find out. Each call felt like a tiny echo of Mara's laughter from the night before, but this time directed at him indirectly. He didn't answer. He didn't even look at the messages. He needed clarity before he acted. Elias spent the morning drafting, carefully, methodically. He didn't want anger to make the message bitter. It had to be clean, precise. Tuition support would stop at the semester's end. Rent assistance would end in 30 days. Medical bills, he considered, would have to be handled case by case. No accusations, no threats, no judgmental words. Just facts, boundaries, lines that had been invisible to them for too long. He pressed send with a measured breath and felt the first strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because the decision was his. Dread because the consequences would unfold faster than he could imagine. By midday, the responses started. Linda first, confused, then defensive, then desperate. Each voicemail built a kind of tension that felt physical. "We don't understand," she said at one point. It didn't mean anything. It was a joke. Another, "You can't do this. We're family. This isn't fair." Elias listened silently to each one, the sound of their panic pressing against the walls of his apartment. He let the words wash over him, but didn't respond. Their reactions were exactly what he had expected, though he would never admit it. He walked the apartment in circles. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. He considered the moral weight of his actions. This revenge, some might call it that. He told himself it was justice, a consequence of careless cruelty. But beneath that, he felt something else, a desire to make them understand the gravity of their behavior. To feel a fraction of the discomfort he had endured at that table. The tension became almost unbearable. Elias imagined Mara opening the letter that confirmed she would lose financial support. He imagined her shock, the realization that life had boundaries and that wealth did not protect her from accountability. He pictured Linda reading the message and feeling the same helplessness he had felt when she had smiled at Mara's cruelty without intervening. He knew it wasn't just about money, it was about control, about making them see him as more than an invisible benefactor. The afternoon passed slowly. Calls continued. Voicemails stacked up, some pleading, some angry. By the 20th call, Linda's voice broke, and desperation seeped through. "Please," she said, "you're hurting. Her too much. You're overreacting." Elias didn't flinch. He felt the weight of every year he had been patient, every kindness taken for granted. He thought of Mara's words again, and the casual way she dismissed his life. The laughter, the thinness of it, the comfort of it all. It was unbearable in memory. He left the apartment for a walk. The streets were busy, but he moved in slow, deliberate steps, focusing on the rhythm of his stride. He passed cafes, shops, and families laughing together. And each sight reminded him of what he had endured, alone, not sadness at being single, but the erasure of his life and effort. He considered all the possibilities. He could relent, answer the calls, soothe the panic, restore the payments. Or he could maintain his course, letting the consequences teach lessons long overdue. Each option carried weight. Each would leave a mark. Elias wrestled with his conscience. Revenge was tempting, easy. It promised immediate satisfaction, a sense of equilibrium. But he felt the quiet pull of restraint, the possibility that his actions could be measured and controlled rather than destructive. His mind shifted rapidly, weighing anger against morality, pride against clarity. He saw a choice forming not between kindness and cruelty, but between reaction and intention. As evening fell, he returned home. The apartment was dim, only the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the papers scattered in careful order. He made coffee again and sat, watching the sunlight fade from the room. His phone was silent now. He had let the calls go. 31 missed calls. 31 chances to break his resolve. Each one had passed. He felt a strange sense of power. But it was hollow, distant, not triumph. Not yet. He considered what would happen if he held the line, kept the boundaries strict. Mara would learn that life had limits. Linda would have to confront her own complacency. He felt the tension tighten in his chest, a knot of anticipation, fear, and grim satisfaction. The thought of the moment when they would finally understand that was the edge he teetered on. It was the reason he walked the streets, why he replayed. Every word, every glance, every half-laugh from the previous night. The night deepened. Elias sat alone, the apartment silent except for the occasional hum of traffic below. He considered the person he was becoming, not the invisible provider, not the background supporter, but someone who demanded acknowledgement, someone who had learned that silence could no longer protect him, that patience had limits. He realized that his next step, whatever it was, would define not just the family's perception of him, but his own understanding of what respect and justice truly meant. By the end of the day, Elias was exhausted yet focused. He had set boundaries, faced the panic of those who took his generosity for granted, and confronted his own feelings about revenge. He understood the stakes. He understood the risk. And most importantly, he understood that the weight of his choices now lay squarely on his shoulders. He went to bed with the knowledge that tomorrow everything could change. He had started the process. The consequences were already unfolding. Mara would face them. Linda would face them. and Elias would face his own desire for vengeance and his capacity for restraint. The quiet, intense suspense of that night wrapped around him, leaving him restless but determined, ready for whatever came next. Elias woke to another quiet morning, the city outside moving as if nothing had changed. Inside, his apartment felt heavier. 31 missed calls, dozens of voicemails, and still no answer. He didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. The tension lingered, pressing down, a quiet storm he couldn't ignore. He brewed coffee and sipped slowly, letting the bitter warmth anchor him. The decision to set boundaries had been deliberate, calculated, but now the weight of its consequences pressed. This was no longer about making Mara or Linda uncomfortable. It was about understanding what kind of person he wanted to be and what kind of family he wanted around him. By mid-morning, he received another message from Mara. Not casual this time, not joking. "We need to talk." Elias didn't respond. He wanted the conversation to happen on his terms. He wanted clarity. He wanted respect, not panic. Spent the morning walking through scenarios, each more tense than the last. If he let his anger guide him, he could feel the satisfaction of their surprise, their discomfort. But he also felt the hollowness of revenge, the fleeting, empty victory it promised. Could he truly enjoy it without losing himself? He went out for a walk to think. The city's energy pressed around him, people laughing in cafes, couples walking, hand in hand, workers rushing to deadlines. Each scene reminded him of the life he had been mocked for living alone. But he realized that his loneliness had been his choice, his discipline, and his focus. He had built a life even if it didn't match their expectations. Mara's insult had struck a nerve, not because of his single status, but because it dismissed everything he had done to support them. By the afternoon, he agreed to meet Linda. She had left a message insisting on a face-to-face conversation. They chose a small, neutral cafe. Elias arrived early, as always, choosing a table where he could observe, where he could measure the conversation before it happened. When Linda walked in, her posture was tight, shoulders hunched, eyes avoiding direct contact. She looked smaller than usual, fragile in a way he had never seen before. For the first time, he sensed the impact of his actions on her, not just anger or frustration, but genuine fear and worry. They exchanged polite greetings. The tension was immediate, palpable, like a low hum in the air. Linda's hands shook slightly as she set down her cup of coffee. "Please," she said quickly, voice strained. "We need to talk about Mara, about the payments, about everything." Elias nodded slowly, letting the pause stretch. He wanted her to feel the weight of her own choices, the silence she had held. During the dinner, when her daughter mocked him, Linda spoke fast, words tumbling out in a rush. She admitted mistakes, apologized for letting Mara cross boundaries, admitted she had never stood up for him. She tried to explain Mara's behavior as youthful ignorance, poor judgment, the kind of thing parents underestimated. Elias listened without interrupting. Each admission, each plea added layers to the tension he carried. He felt his resolve, tested not by anger, but by empathy, by the vulnerability now present in the person who had once seemed untouchable. He responded carefully. He did not apologize for setting boundaries. He did not excuse Mara's behavior. Instead, he spoke about respect, about accountability, about the invisible toll of years spent quietly supporting the family while being dismissed. He outlined the limits clearly. Tuition would not continue. Rent support would cease in 30 days. But this was not permanent exile. This was a lesson, a boundary, a demand for acknowledgement. "I will not continue to be invisible," he said softly. "I will not allow disrespect to pass unchecked. But I am not closing the door completely. Respect is required if you want to be part of my life." Linda listened, head bowed, shame etched in every line of her face. The conversation shifted from blame to understanding. For the first time, Elias saw that the real change needed was not in him or in the payments, but in the dynamics they had allowed to exist unchecked. Mara needed to understand the consequences of mocking him, and Linda needed to understand her role in enabling it. The power balance had shifted, and for the first time, Elias felt in control without needing to punish. Later that week, Mara reached out, not a text, a letter, handwritten, careful, deliberate. It was awkward, defensive at first, but quickly turned sincere. She apologized, not just for the joke, but for the assumption that his life was empty because it looked different from hers. She admitted she had never considered the weight of his silence, the quiet support he had given her family for years. Elias read the words slowly, absorbing the shift. Satisfaction came not from punishment, but from acknowledgement, from seeing that his actions had sparked reflection. Elias did not feel victorious in the traditional sense. He did not feel the rush of revenge. Instead, he felt something heavier, deeper relief, clarity, and a renewed sense of self-worth. He had enforced boundaries without cruelty, demanded respect without humiliation, and shown that strength could exist without bitterness. The lesson was clear. Revenge promised a fleeting sense of justice, but measured action brought lasting recognition. He reflected on the entire ordeal. Kay had been entitled, Linda had been complacent, but he had been passive for too long. His silence had allowed them to underestimate him, to mock him casually. By acting, he had reclaimed control of his life and his relationships. But he had done it without destroying connections, without generating hatred. The choice had been deliberate, the consequence thoughtful. And in that choice, he found a form of satisfaction that revenge could never provide. Evenings became quiet. Again, but in a different way. The apartment felt lighter. Its coffee tasted better. He could sit and look out at the city without replaying insults, without imagining what might happen if he struck back. He had faced the tension, carried the weight of decisions, and come through not hardened, but clearer. Mara had learned her lesson. Linda had confronted her own failures. And Elias had found peace in the end. Elias understood that revenge might offer momentary satisfaction, a thrill of dominance or retribution. But restraint, clarity, and deliberate action brought real power. He had not only defended himself, but he had also redefined his family's respect for him. The experience left him contemplative, aware that life demanded both boundaries and forgiveness. Satisfaction came not from causing pain, but from asserting dignity and integrity. He often thought back to the dinner. The laughter, the smirk, the casual dismissal of his life. It had sparked this entire journey. But the outcome was not a story of revenge, was a story of recognition. He had drawn the line, enforced it, and maintained his moral compass. The lesson was simple but profound. True strength lies not in retaliation, but in the courage to demand respect, in the ability to act decisively without losing one's humanity, and in understanding that consequences teach more than punishment ever could. Elias leaned back one evening, looking at the skyline from his window. The city moved endlessly, indifferent to his small personal victories. But inside he felt balanced, grounded, and respected, not because he had taken revenge, but because he had acted with intention. Amara had grown, Linda had grown, and he had grown. He realized that revenge, unchecked, could destroy, but measured action could restore. That realization left him calm, steady, and, most importantly, free.